Many of you are of an age that you would remember also the Ella Fitzgerald advertising campaign for Memorex. And action. Welcome back to Show and Tell. I'm Billie. Let me kick this episode off by thanking so many of you for subscribing during my last episode, my recap of Vogue Knitting Live right here in my backyard in New York City. I hope that you'll enjoy many more episodes of this, and there's a huge library of back episodes for your viewing pleasure too. In the course of this episode, I may refer to one or two. I'll put links. You'd think after 4 years I would get this right. I'll put links up here for you to refer back to. Anyway, welcome. I also wanted to say a quick welcome to a new member of the extended Show and Tell family. Sophie, one of my early guests, a very beloved guest, in fact, because as it turns out, her episode has the most views to date of all of my episodes. Sophie just had a little baby girl, so I wanted to welcome her new baby to our world. I know that this baby is going to be the recipient of many lovingly knit garments, booties, hats, blankets, what have you. So if you want to wish Sophie congratulations, a good place would be to comment below. I hope she'll be watching that space to see your comments. Let me not let another moment go by without wishing you a happy belated Valentine's Day. I hope that you had yummy chocolates and beautiful roses and everything else that Valentine's Day brings. So the elephant in the room is no doubt this sweater, which I called Swizzle Stick. It's a 1930s pattern. It has some generic name. Let me stand up and show it to you. This beautiful blue yarn was a gift from my friend Susie in Altoona, Pennsylvania, who purchased it for me at Underhill Farms. She also bought me this color, but for some reason, I wanted to pair this with a darker color. And as luck would have it, I found this midnight blue color at Rhinebeck. I scoured all of Rhinebeck looking for just the right thing to match this. And I think I did pretty well. Let me put my beret closer to the screen. I don't know if you can see, but there are very light flecks mixed in here, which are almost this exact color. I'm not sure if we're calling this periwinkle blue. It's sort of like a bluish lavender. I stumbled upon this necklace in a charity shop and this pin. This was I don't know, like a double bonus because I found both of them at the same time and they both had that kind of periwinkle blue coloring. And I thought they were both very deco. I love these little, they're like chiclets to me. Both of these yarns are mohair, 100%. 100% mohair. And not of the weight that you usually see when you're looking at something like Kid Silk Haze. This is almost like a fingering weight. Now, the fact that it was knit in lace, I was able to use a larger size needle than you would typically use for this weight of yarn. You might remember I struggled with the chenille yarn. I wanted to do this pattern and I just couldn't get the yarn to behave. Finally, I had success with this yarn, and I think the lace pattern is kind of attractive. I'm really happy with the fit and the outcome of this sweater. I think the waistband hits me in a really good spot, which isn't always the case. I wanted to get into talking about fit, since you may know it's been an ongoing issue for me. at VKL, I took a course given by Deborah Newton about good fit. And while she recommends using the schematics of a pattern, we vintage knitters know that generally these patterns do not come with schematics. So of course you can create your own, which I sometimes do. I don't do it in great detail, but I do want to use their gauge and their number of stitches and see how many inches are they doing at the bust, how many inches are they doing at the waist, and then I try and size up to get my own size. For years, I've been putting off what probably was the inevitable, to really get my measurements transferred onto either a piece of fabric or a piece of paper or something that I could use as a template to measure my garments against. So after taking Deborah Newton's course, in which we all measured one another and wrote those measurements down, I have created a template for my Body Beautiful. And I wanted to share that with you today. It's on a shopping bag that I recycled. The fold is the center line, and this bottom fold is where my high hip is. The bottom edge is my hip. The waist is marked here. You might not be able to see this writing. And then I have the measurement from the top of the neck to the waist and so on. But once I knew these measurements, then I was able to kind of make a curve that would indicate, you know, my narrowest point, the bust width, wider than my waist, fortunately, hips, and the hips keep getting bigger as we go down. So I feel that now that I have this, I may be able to get better fit. One can hope, right? I will leave a link in the show notes to my Ravelry page for this. You'll be able to see the specific yarns and the needles and all that. Now, the other elephant in the room, the baby elephant, is this little beret. I had yarn left over. In fact, I had just enough yarn to make this little beret. It's a little smaller than my other berets, and I brought them with me today to show you again, because I wanted everybody to know, if it's your first time or if you didn't hear the episode in which I announced this, I will be doing a beret knit along called Anyway Beret, because you can make it in any way that suits you, pretty much with any kind of yarn, between fingering and I think Aran weight is what the upper limit would be. So here's one example. Here's another example of a beret I've made. And here's a third example of a beret I've made. Each of these were made with a specific sweater in mind so that I could have an ensemble, if you will. If that's something that appeals to you, if you'd like to have like more of a complete set with a little vintage kind of a headgear, I encourage you to join us. I'm going to do 3 episodes on Zoom starting in early March, March 2nd, and wrapping up March 16th. It's more than enough time. Really, if you knit exclusively on something like this, you could accomplish it in a couple of days. But I know people have other commitments and maybe other projects that they're working on, and maybe they don't want to do this exclusively. So I'm, spreading it out over a couple of weeks. If you're interested, all you have to do is put the word beret in the comments, and I will contact you with the link to go to the sign-up form. I'll also put the sign-up form in the show notes, but I know not everybody's good at like sifting through all the many notes I have. But I did want to say, I welcome your participation in that. I think it'll be fun. And my experience with doing other knit-alongs is that people tend to complete the project when we're working together as a group, because we come together face to face, sort of over Zoom. You're not just out there working on your own. You have a little bit of accountability and also the goal of completion, because we'll all try and complete this working on it together. It's really doable. It's a small project. If you have yarn left over from a favorite sweater, it's the perfect use for a couple hundred yards, a few hundred yards of leftover yarn. Think about that. There's still time to sign up. Again, just comment below. In the last episode, I showed you the yarn that I had just received from Morehouse Farms. And it would be no surprise to most of you that I jumped right in with both feet and cast on my next project, which I don't think I told you what the project is. In fact, I started out knitting something else, and then I saw it wasn't working out for me. I ripped it out and started a completely different sweater. I had originally, well, let me say this. At Vogue Knitting Live, I was hoping to buy 2 yarns, one for a chunky sweater, a bulky weight, 3 stitches per inch, and another for a fingering weight with 6.5 stitches per inch. I didn't succeed in finding either of those yarns. What I did find was this yarn, which is a sport weight from Morehouse Farm. I liked them. I wanted to support their endeavors. I liked the yarn. I liked the bounciness of it. I started by changing the number of stitches to make an accommodation for the thinner yarn that I would be using. I didn't want to double this and swatch because I wouldn't have had enough yarn. So I started to try and do a different number of stitches, but I found that the way the pattern was written, it's raglan, and there was something decorative happening in the raglan shaping that I wasn't sure I was going to be able to recreate. I had graph paper, digital graph paper, and I was mapping it out, and I thought, well, you know, it's going to get more and more complicated. I'm going to give myself a headache. I don't need to do that. So I ripped it back and I started afresh with the other sweater, because this yarn was at least closer in weight to the fingering that the pattern called for. Again, I did all the measurements of each part of the sweater and adapted it to my measurements and then my gauge to come up with a completely different number of stitches than what the pattern called for. I'm so used to knitting on very tiny needles, so to knit on size 3 and 6, this thing just whipped up in a jiffy. This is sleeve number 1. Instead of swatching, I sort of did a little tiny swatch just to see what needles, what fabric do I like. And then I just started right in on the sleeve, which is what I often do, so that my time isn't wasted. If it's working, great, I continue. If it's not working, then I'll use it as a swatch and try different needles. At least I haven't wasted this investment of my time. I guess I don't want to say waste, because swatching is never a waste. But it does double duty, I guess is what I'm trying to say. If it works, great, I'm ahead of the game. So here's sweater number 1. I just want to mention, oh, by the way, this is merino, 100%, not superwash. The sleeve cap is a little interesting because it goes straight. This is like a just straight edge. But then there's this little tab at the top. And I think what's going to happen is this tab will get folded under to give a little bit of a shoulder padding. I'm not sure that I've done it correctly. I'll know better when I get to inserting the sleeve in the arm side. But what I did throughout this was I just kept measuring it against my arm to make sure that every step of the way, it's hard to do, midair, the edges are all curling up, but I tried every step of the way to just, hold it around my arm and make sure that I had enough to go all the way, and tried to get the right length, at least to my underarm. So I think I'm in good shape with sleeve number 1. I will probably save sleeve number 2 for later on. I know that this took almost the entirety of one skein. That's what's left over. And I haven't cut it off yet, just in case I need to make the sleeve longer when I go to set it. But that's not all. I really wanted to jump into the color work part of it, because that's where it's going to get exciting. So this sweater is a Tyrolean sweater. I was a little inspired by my guest, Linda Ivel, and I'll leave a link to my interview with her. My sweater is not really going to be Tyrolean. My sweater is going to be more like a Russian folk, like a peasant kind of a thing. So I have modified the colors for sure, and also a little bit the size of the flowers. Since my gauge is different, I had to make them a little bit smaller, a little bit narrower. Not smaller in size, perhaps, but smaller in number of stitches. So this is, this is front right. A lot of ribbing. There's 4 inches of ribbing here. And then right away, pretty much right after the ribbing, starting with the flowers, I probably will be doing some kind of embroidery on here to make the center of the flower and the petal markings. I just didn't want to have one stitch, one stitch. It's bad enough when you're doing intarsia and you have these different strings hanging. Of course, I could weave them in as I go, but just in case I have to rip this out, I didn't want everything all woven in. That would be a really big nightmare. The back of the sweater, I'm not going to tell you just yet, but the back of the sweater and the pattern is solid color. I'm not going to do that. There is going to be a big surprise on the back of the sweater. I have been creating the design myself. That's where this Russian idea will come in. So be sure to tune in to future episodes to see that unfold, and I'll talk more about that as I get to that part. Probably I'll do both the fronts before I tackle the back, especially because I only bought 5 skeins of the black, knowing that I was going to do some serious color work. So I want to see what I have left over with the black to make sure that I leave myself enough and fill in with other color yarns where I might not have enough black to carry me through. I hope you understood what I just said. It's a little convoluted. That's one thing that's on my needles, but there are other things. This is the Rimska sweater. Before I show it to you, I just wanted to mention that I was at a meeting in a woman's home. We were a small group of knitters gathered around her dining table. And there was a French woman in the group, and we got to chatting a little bit. I always like to practice my French when I encounter someone who's a native speaker. And when I showed the group this little bed jacket that I'm making, at least I've described it as a bed jacket. I don't know if this is a garment that I would wear outside on the street. It's very floofy. It's like being in a cloud. So I learned a new vocabulary word is what I was trying to get to. The word for bed jacket in French is liseuse. I'm not sure how to spell it. Google Translate is not giving that as the translation. So this is a very, I guess, like a technical word, kind of like some of the knitting terms might be. But it's always exciting to get new vocabulary. Okay, so I started to assemble this jacket because it was really unwieldy. There are 5 parts, the 2 fronts, 2 sleeves, and the back. And I really wanted to see like the size and the shape. And to make sure that I was getting like somewhere in the vicinity of a decent fit. It is meant to be oversized. How much ease did I want? I really wasn't sure, but I kept asking people as I was knitting it down, and people were giving me the green light, so I proceeded. I think it is going to be a little bit too big, but I have plenty of yarn. I can make it longer, which might be a little more slenderizing, a little better silhouette for me. Anyway, here's the back. And I have it pinned together in the front. There's supposed to be a knitted neckband that ties in a bow. I'm not sure if I'm going to do that. I tried knitting that piece of lace, and because here too, I'm not getting the gauge, I'm not using the yarn the pattern called for. I felt it was a little bit wider than what I might like. So I was thinking, and I'd love for you to weigh in, I was thinking of buying some beautiful plain satin ribbon, maybe even in this color so that I could wear this together. I have to see when it's done, if I try it on, like how it resonates. It's like a lot of mohair. Anyway, maybe a satin ribbon with a tie. I think that would make it look very bedroomy. That is coming along. I tried to knit all the different parts down to the same level so that I would be able to maybe do like all row 1 on all the parts and then row 2 on all the parts. It was sort of a pipe dream. I'm not exactly doing that, but it's moving along. I have plenty of yarn also, so enough yarn certainly to make a beret if I want a beret to match this. Okay, now I have white fuzz all over my black pants. Thank you very much. Yeah, those are the 2 main things. I've worked on this chartreuse scarf a little bit, but I don't think it's worth showing it to you this time. Or is it? Maybe I should get it. I think it's been a while since I showed you this, the Ibiza lace scarf that I'm knitting. So I've knit all of this. And there are 2 parts that are supposed to be grafted. So I don't know if I stopped midway, but I stopped, I think it's 34 rows. So at the end of row 34, and then I cast on the other side, and these 2 sides will eventually be grafted together. The reason for doing that is if you see this edge, it's not a straight edge. I did a long tail cast on, but because of the way the stitches go, it becomes sort of like a zigzaggy edge. Of course, when this is blocked, it will hold these points a little better. But anyway, you see that it's not straight across. Hence, you want to graft these 2 so you have the ruffly edges on the side. This is how much I have done on the second portion. I can't call it the second half because I don't know that it's going to be half, but it's a project that is very portable. I can just put this and the cone of yarn in practically any one of my handbags and take this with me on the subway or wherever I'm going. I do have a notebook with the line by line instructions. Usually I can work on, 1 or 2 rows on a subway trip. So it's not that big a deal to have my little notes out for just that. It's an easy project for me to carry along because it's so compact. And it's complicated, but it's not that complicated. The color work with the chart, to have to refer to that, is more complicated, I feel, than this. Sophie's baby is not the only baby born recently. My cousin just had another grandchild, and the mother and father named their baby Gray. So I thought, oh, what an opportunity to knit a gray sweater, my favorite color to knit with. I refer you to the episode where I showed all my gray sweaters. So this yarn just arrived from Lovecrafts. I waited until today to open this with you. It's always scary. They don't have a like a pull tab, but I think it's safe. I think it's safe to cut here. At least I hope it's safe. It feels okay so far. Yes, these are my mother's 1950s scissors. These are the first scissors I remember ever seeing in my life. Ooh, wonderful. So I wanted something cotton. This baby lives in the desert where it's hot 365 days of the year. I didn't want anything with wool, not even a blend. And, on my computer screen, you're never sure what's the color. So I looked for something that I was pretty sure was going to be a pearl gray. And this is even lighter than what I was expecting. So I am thrilled. And I have 4 little balls of it. Let me show you. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. This is their paint box yarns. I've used paint box, I think not this weight. The lavender sweater that I made with a little matching cloche. I'll leave a link to that episode as well. This is cotton Aran. It doesn't look like Aran weight to me, but it's made in Bulgaria, 100% cotton, and they're recommending US 7 or 4.5 millimeter needles. So I think that's great. The pattern that I plan to cast on probably today is called Baby Sophisticate. It's like a grandpa sweater for a tiny one. And I'll be showing it to you in upcoming episodes. So stay tuned. Other news since I last really chatted with you is that I've attended several different knitting groups in New York. I didn't know this at the beginning of the pandemic when I started knitting feverishly, that there were all these different knitting groups in New York City. And I've attended meetings of a variety of them. They're all wonderful. Each one has different people and they're all phenomenal individuals. Recently, though, I attended a couple of things of the Big Apple Knitters Guild. I volunteered at their table at VKL, first of all, so I got to meet some of the officers and some of the members. But they recently had their monthly meeting where Kristen Grimes came in person, and I think there were about 140 people at this meeting. I'll put a picture here so you can see. There was an opportunity to do show and tell. So yours truly showed my genie sweater and the little matching hat that I made. People were blown away. I mean, who wouldn't be? 46 stitches to 4 inches. It is incredible. But Kristen Grimes was there and she did a tutorial on how to make one of these lobster claw lanyards. It's using I-cord. She demoed it in both knitting and crochet. I did the knit. They gave us cord. Everybody had a different color. And they gave us the lobster claw. And then she gave us instructions on how to do it. So I just wanted to share that with you since something novel, something different. It's not wool. It's like a cotton rope, almost thin rope. I have some other photos that I'll insert at the end of some other events that I've been involved with in recent weeks. You'll see me on this big bicycle, and I think I have a picture of the Zamboni and an ice skating rink right outside of where we were meeting. and an art exhibit in a part of New York called Dumbo, which stands for Down Under the Manhattan Bridge. So many of you may remember The Voice That Shattered Glass, a series of commercials featuring the late Ella Fitzgerald. If you've been around this channel for a while, you will certainly know that I have an interest in all things vintage, not just vintage glassware from my great-grandparents, not just vintage costume jewelry, not just vintage garments, but also vintage music. Lately, I've expanded my range of interests from jazz and popular music to opera, which is even more vintage than 1940s jazz. I know many of you are of an age that you would remember also the Ella Fitzgerald advertising campaign for Memorex. So I came across this very interesting article, and I wanted to just read it to you. I'll also leave a link so you can go and hear it if you're not familiar with that campaign. This article was from NPR, written by Michelle Mercer back in 2019. It's the stuff of legends, an urban legend and a jazz legend combining into a legendary advertising campaign. In 1970, the Leo Burnett ad agency in Chicago had an imaginative idea for selling Memorex's new line of blank cassette tapes. They'd prove the old myth that an opera singer could shatter a wine glass with a high note, and then claim a Memorex cassette had such an exacting sound precision that its recording of the singer could break a glass too. Leo Burnett made a couple TV commercials with this theme featuring tenor Enrico Di Giuseppe and soprano Nancy Shade. The tagline, Memorex recording tape, reproduction so true it can shatter glass. It was a good enough start, but opera was too elitist for Memorex's larger aims. After first reaching out to audiophiles, early cassette advertising was placed in magazines like High Fidelity and Stereo Review. The company wanted to target a broader demographic with TV commercials aired during football games on CBS. The glass-breaking cassette campaign needed a spokesperson whose musical style embodied a more casual brilliance. Enter Ella Fitzgerald, jazz legend, gold standard for vocal excellence, and paradigm of high-fidelity sound, thanks to her influential mid-century recordings. Music historian Judith Tick, who's finishing a book about Fitzgerald, says the singer's career was a perfect fit for the campaign, as she was known at the time not only as a legend, but as a treasure bearer of American culture. Her immense body of work began in the 1930s, peaked in the 1940s with a bullseye pitch accuracy, vocal range, and sheer originality of her scat singing innovation, and then peaked again with her definitive 1950s and early 60s songbook interpretations of Gershwin, Rodgers and Hart, Cole Porter, and others. In a 1985 interview, Fitzgerald remembered her Memorex audition at the Algonquin Hotel in New York. They asked me to do the ending of How High the Moon. I just kept singing, High, High the Moon, doing the ending. And when the glass broke, they said, that's the one. Then I got the job. A lot of people say, did you really break the glass? We had to prove that. They had lawyers there. So in 1972, at age 55, Ella Fitzgerald became the spokesperson for Memorex cassettes. These commercials came at an important juncture in both Fitzgerald's career and in jazz. After decades as the First Lady of Song, Fitzgerald faced a time when traditional jazz was declining in popularity. But as the Memorex campaign became an institution, it fueled a career revival that helped to extend her relevance in new ways and eventually positioned her to hand off the baton to the next generation. In the campaign's earliest TV spots, Fitzgerald scat sings, hits a high note, and shatters a goblet, as countless sound engineers and a 2005 Mythbusters segment have proven. Breaking a glass wouldn't have been an unlikely feat for Fitzgerald, especially with her voice amplified. Most glasses resonate at a frequency around high C. With Fitzgerald's 2-octave range, hitting that note would have been no problem. Just as critical to Fitzgerald's authenticity in the campaign is her unreconstructed middle-aged appearance. Her wig, round body, and in some spots, cataract-correcting eyeglasses lend warmth and conviction to her televisual style. The iconic Fitzgerald comes across as so real in the commercials that her mere presence authenticates the ad's claim of a Memorex cassette recording breaking a glass. Is it live or is it Memorex? The ads ask. What matters is that it's Fitzgerald on screen. Dizzy Gillespie famously said that Fitzgerald could sing back anything he played on the trumpet. If the commercial's message hinged on her ability to leave a goblet in shards, her scat singing carried weight in the spot too. It means improvisation. It means freedom, says Tick. So when you have Ella scat sing, the epitome of this great improvisatory skill, it just reinforces something about jazz that speaks to young people and speaks to all of us. It's a magical craft. And that magic about scat carries over to the magic of the glass shattering. Fitzgerald's scat singing also played to the idea of consumers making their own recording copies and mixes, improvising their own musical experiences onto blank cassettes. In 1974, Memorex introduced a new TV spot and angle for the Fitzgerald campaign. Count Basie, Fitzgerald's old bandmate, sits with his back to a recording booth, listening for the difference between Fitzgerald's live voice amplified through speakers and a Memorex tape recording of it. "You got to be kidding. I can't tell," he says, as if in on an elaborate joke. Fitzgerald or cassette recording? If jazz royalty like Count Basie can't tell and doesn't care, why should we? Consumers can only deduce that playing a Memorex tape is interchangeable with having Fitzgerald sing in their homes. Harkening back to man versus machine fables, to John Henry against the steam-powered drill, the message in this spot is that human expression and cassette technology can come together for the win. It couldn't seem quainter today. Memorex's appeal to audio sophistication with a TV listening stunt, all to sell a recording format that's long been outmoded. But veteran recording engineer Jim Anderson says it's not so improbable that Count Basie or his Memorex commercial successor, jazz arranger Nelson Riddle, might have failed the Ella or Memorex test. The trick is they're not in the room with Fitzgerald. Anderson says the musicians were likely in the control room hearing a live playback of the musicians in the studio or a tape of that same performance, which he argues could be pretty convincing. He adds that Count Basie and Nelson Riddle were over 50 at the time, after long careers spent in front of live bands, and their hearing probably wasn't as sharp as it would have been 20 or 30 years before that. With cassette companies selling ever-improving quality throughout the 1970s, noise reduction, corrections to wow and flutter, those pesky tape fluctuations in pitch and tone, the technology would have seemed cutting edge to many consumers. In his spot with Fitzgerald, Nelson Riddle lacked Basie's ironic twinkle, displaying some awkwardness in the role. It hardly mattered. In the era of 3-network TV, Memorex commercials aired on both CBS and NBC during football games and rock shows. Anyone who watched television at all was likely to catch a Fitzgerald Memorex spot. The "Is it live or is it Memorex" campaign and tagline became a branding success on par with Maxwell House's "Good to the Last Drop" or Timex's "It Takes a Lickin' and Keeps on Tickin'." As the campaign became an institution, Fitzgerald, pushing 60, reveled in a Memorex-fueled career resurgence. As the critic Leonard Feather wrote, Ella Fitzgerald's pitch for Memorex probably did more for her than 100 concerts. Fitzgerald's career revival came at a time of critical anxiety around the idea of selling out, thanks in part to the declining commercial success of traditional jazz and the popularity of fusion bands like Herbie Hancock's Headhunters. For some jazz purists, using the art form to hawk cassettes on TV amounted to a capital offense. One jazz critic went so far as to call Fitzgerald a freakish cultural icon for her glass-shattering Memorex turn. Fitzgerald was indifferent to stylistic boundaries and popular anxieties. Her career dated back to the 1930s when jazz was mainstream music. Fitzgerald had made on-screen appearances since 1942 when she sang her breakthrough hit, A Tisket a Tasket, in the film Ride 'em Cowboy. She always wanted to reach as many people as possible, says Tick. So for her, reaching out to a mass public was not any kind of handicap. It was what she would want to do. Mainstream appeal had distinct value for artists of color, Tick adds. Ella and Basie both know how great it is for Black singers and Black artists to be given this chance to endorse such an important product that is mainstream. We know that Black artists were kept off the radio and television. It changes in the 1970s because we're in the post-civil rights era, and the prestige of Black is beautiful, Black pride, Black culture is emerging. And that means there were Black celebrities by the end of the 70s who were doing all kinds of endorsements. By 1975, Memorex's MRX2 was the best-selling cassette tape in the United States. Still, there was stiff competition from rival companies like TDK and Scotch, which would enlist Stevie Wonder and Ray Charles as spokespeople in the late 70s. As Memorex marketing manager Jack Rohr told Billboard in 1976, the company needed to capture the attention of younger tape users who are just learning to appreciate cassettes. So Memorex produced a fresh commercial teaming Fitzgerald with Melissa Manchester, a rising 25-year-old singer-songwriter best known for the hit Midnight Blue. Manchester had sung backup for Bette Midler and the Harlettes and worked as a staff songwriter for Warner Chappell. And she'd been a devoted Fitzgerald fan from the moment she heard the singer's Gershwin Songbook album as a little girl. I had no idea what she was singing about, but I decided there and then that I wanted to live where she lived. She just was my guiding light through my whole life, she says. When I first got to meet her on the set of the Memorex commercial, she was so jolly and so dear and so huggy. I immediately felt confirmed of all I had hoped for, that she was just magnificent in every way. In the spot, Manchester was thrilled to flunk what she now calls as a kosher Ella or Memorex listening test. Nobody's perfect, quips Fitzgerald, embracing Manchester. In the ad, Fitzgerald seems fully herself on screen, and in this spot's generational scheme, that signature warm, matronly appearance had special meaning. Manchester, meanwhile, recalls wearing what she considered appropriate attire, a loose blouse and jeans, but was called off the set after a take or two. My manager said to me, the producer would like you to put tape over your nipples for the next shoot, she remembers. In the mid-70s, a braless style was trendy and would have resonated with younger consumers, but Manchester wasn't allowed to sport that look. However, Fitzgerald was granted her usual autonomy of self-presentation. I think Ella becomes a kind of maternal figure in that ad, Judith Tick says. She's passing the torch to Melissa Manchester. Not the torch of jazz, but the torch of endorsing Memorex, or the torch of purity of tone. As the commercial aired on TV, Manchester's rich, dramatic voice became a radio staple on ballads like the Ice Castles theme song, Through the Eyes of Love, and her 1979 hit, Don't Cry Out Loud. With the advent of the car cassette deck, Sony's release of the first Walkman, and the growing phenomenon of mixtape sharing, cassette sales were very much on the rise at the end of the 70s. But the Fitzgerald-Memorex partnership showed signs of wear. A 1979 Memorex spot featured Fitzgerald opposite jazz flugelhorn player Chuck Mangione, who performed Feels So Good, his rare instrumental hit. Here the roles are inverted. Fitzgerald sits outside the booth listening for the difference between Mangione's live performance and a cassette recording. Though this version with Mangione aired widely, Fitzgerald's transition from live singer to passive stock icon implied her obsolescence. The generational shift initiated in the Manchester spot is completed here, with Mangione's youthful enthusiasm and trendiness overshadowing Fitzgerald's classic appeal. The campaign had run its course, and as popular as cassettes were becoming, they accounted for less than 15% of Memorex's total sales. The company's deep losses in the early 80s would prompt the sale of its consumer business, including its cassette campaign in 1982. For most of a decade, the Memorex commercials presented Fitzgerald as an exemplar of sound fidelity, model of authenticity, and most significantly, her own artist. Fitzgerald's peer, Billie Holiday, had her tragic legend overtake her art in the broader culture. In contrast, Fitzgerald's late career Memorex ads put her inimitable style and voice right at the center of her popular reputation, helping to grow the legend of her art itself. The commercials made Fitzgerald into a folk hero synonymous with cassette technology. Children on the street called out to Fitzgerald as the Memorex lady, to her delight. She'd tell of airplane pilots warning her not to sing on their flights for fear of broken plane windows. The ad campaign capitalized on a folk legend about the human voice's glass-breaking force. It mythologized Fitzgerald's vocal power as timeless and inescapable. Nothing was immune. A 1987 Jet magazine news item mentioned the Memorex spots as it reported that firefighters had rushed to Fitzgerald's Beverly Hills home after her singing triggered a fire alarm, all while she was recovering from open heart surgery at age 69. Now, many technologies later and decades after Fitzgerald's 1996 death, these cassette commercials may feel like the distant past, but the question of how we relate to analog or digital voices has never left us. Memorex's marriage of cassette technology and Fitzgerald's musical presence resonates today in our relationship with AI voices like Siri and Alexa. Fitzgerald's unique talent and character in these 1970s spots point to why her voice in particular endures as a hallmark of style, quality, and invention. Only Ella Fitzgerald in the living, singing flesh could have become the Memorex lady. She was an American original. I loved Ella Fitzgerald. I have many of her records. There are other female vocalists, jazz vocalists, who I also admire. Dinah Washington, Billie Holiday, my namesake, if you will. Nancy Wilson. There are male vocalists as well, Mel Torme. I mean, the list goes on for me. I have a deep passion for music of that period. Obviously, you know, I'm steeped in that period. I love the sweater designs. I love fashion design. I love the dances of the period. So I know you do too. And I thought that this would interest you because I imagine that there's more than one Ella Fitzgerald fan out there in the audience. So I hope you enjoy this little storytelling. Just one more thing before I go, and that is, you know that I'm a big movie lover, and the Oscars is one of the few nights of the year that I actually watch television. I recently attended a talk on Oscar gowns. I'm not going to go into it here. I'm going to save that for when I do my Oscar episode. So stay tuned for that, and I will be back with that in weeks to come. I'm sure I'll see you before then. Take care, everybody. Happy knitting.